Hi, and welcome to Piano Teaching Success Q&A. I'm Gillian Erskine, your host for today's show, as we join piano teachers around the world to be inspired, lifted, and make that our job that little bit easier as we explore our passion for teaching piano. Well, we've got a very special guests with us today, and we have Rae de Lisle and Melody Deng. And Rae is the Associate Professor of Piano at University of Auckland in New Zealand. And Rae is also the author of a most wonderful book on technique. But before we get started with Technique for Beginners, our show today, please let us tell us the backstory, Rae, because there must be a backstory and a reason to write a book like this.
Yes, I guess so, Gillian. It is a bit of a story. I guess over my lifetime of teaching, I've had so many people come to me with injuries, with pain, with stiffness, and I've usually been able to help them. And I guess about 15 or so years ago, I became interested in focal dystonia, which is the most devastating of all musicians' injuries. And this became the subject of a PhD for me. And one of the things I found that helped focal dystonia sufferers was to break the technique down into the most basic concepts. And I found that we had our most revered concert pianist in New Zealand. He had this condition, hadn't been able to play for 4 years. And I was able to help him to get back to playing and to have the next 15 or so years playing at a top level. And so these ideas, I didn't want to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Although people kept on coming to me with injuries, I thought we've got to stop these from happening before the injury happens. And in teaching at the university, we only get 26 lessons in the year, and 26 lessons isn't very long to rejig somebody's technique and also to get them ready for exams. So I thought there has to be a better way, there has to be a quicker way. And part of my research was to go around the world and interview actually 30 to 40 pianists and pedagogues around the world. I went on various courses. Those of you who know the Taubman technique, I went on one of their courses. I went to Northern Carolina to Barbara Lister Sink, and I interviewed some of the top teachers at places like Juilliard and Peabody, and I came up with a whole lot of ideas out of that. And I came back to New Zealand and thought, well, how can I use these ideas to help the students? And I thought, well, in order to be quick, let's devise the most basic movements that we need in order to play well at any level. And I put together a set of exercises and made them part of the coursework for the university students. So they had to do them. And we found we've been doing them now, I suppose, about 8 years, the injury rates have dropped right down, just simply because we've got a toolbox of ideas that everybody has in common, and we can apply them at whatever level. So I guess my belief is that with Fit for Piano, it can be applied at every level, because if people get their technique sorted when they're 5 or when they start, then it just builds in a most natural way, and the progress is happy for everybody.
Absolutely. And Melody, you're one of the little broken people that went to found Rae, weren't you? Tell us your story.
Yeah, I was one of those ambulance cases, I guess. And I think this Fit for Piano journey has been a bit of a personal one, because I have to say, I think without Rae and her tremendous compassion as a teacher and all her years of knowledge and experience, it just wouldn't have been possible for me to continue to play the piano. Because when I first met Rae, I was seriously injured. I had tendonitis in both of my wrists, and the pain was so bad I couldn't play a single bar without getting sore, and I was just in constant agony. And I think Rae saw me playing in an exam one time. She was my examiner. She came up to me afterwards. She's like, "Look, if you keep playing like that, you won't be able to play for the rest of your life." And I was like, "Please teach me." And so luckily she took me on as a student and started my rehabilitation process. And we literally started by learning how to sit at the piano and then how to just play one note without pain. And this sounds crazy because I remember I was so excited to be able to play one note without getting sore. And so after more than a decade of learning the piano, I was a diploma level student. Basically, I had to retrain my technique from scratch. And all of these exercises are in Fit for Piano that was used to put me back together. And I actually thought it was the best thing that could have happened to me at the time, because as I recovered, I felt my playing was easier, my technique was more reliable, and I was able to make music without all these other physical and mental baggage. So I eventually made a full recovery and finished my master's degree in piano pedagogy. And so I think, Rae just said, look, I want you to do some of these exercises in the book. And we sort of started from there, really.
Yeah. How old were you? How old were you when this happened?
I was 18. Yeah, but that was maybe the second time I got injured. That wasn't the first time. So I think from the very beginning, my technique just wasn't good. And I was practicing. I was a really diligent student. I practiced maybe four hours a day.
Wow.
Throughout high school. And it was kind of like the more I practiced, the harder things got,
Yeah. And so were you actually at university doing an exam, or were you doing a...
Yeah, it was my first semester in uni.
Well, you're so lucky that you found Rae, weren't you? It was meant to happen, right?
She was a model student, Gillian. She was absolutely a model student. She did everything I said and applied everything in the most wonderful way. So she was the obvious person to ask to be the hands in the book. And of course, I didn't know that she was such a technological whiz as well. So, it was a win-win in all directions.
That's right. It really is. And we're going to talk about this book in a minute. I got my copy yesterday, yay, in the mail. But before we get on to that, we're just going to say hello to everybody who's with us. We have so many people with us live today, which is so lovely. And we've got Leanna from Utah. Hi, Leanna. And Meg from Carlingford in Sydney. We've got Patricia Crane, who is in California, and also a friend of Leanna as well. And we've got Gabriel So, and Summer Wren, and Charlene also from Auckland. We've got some Auckland people here, yay! And Davina Spring, who's from New Zealand and loves your book, Rae. And Cynthia Delaney up from the Whit Sundays. I think Cynthia likes your book also. So that's fantastic. And if you're also with us and you haven't yet put something in the chat and to let us know, please do. We'd like to give a shout out to you. And also, while we're just talking about some shout outs, Paul and I have been so honoured to be part of 21 Musicians, The Power of Why book, created by Glory St. Germain, which is The Power of Why, 21 musicians who created a program, and The Power of Why. So here's Paul, who had a chat to Glory earlier in the week.
Glory St. Germain, you are the busiest person in the world, I think, sometimes. You've got a series of books coming out called The Power of Why, and I am so honoured to be in one of them, as is Gillian, and it's 21 musicians, why 21 musicians created a program, and why you should too. Tell me about it.
I've always been passionate about sharing inspirational stories that help musicians know that, if someone else can do it, why can't I do it? So I put together this anthology, and I'm so grateful that musicians such as yourself and Gillian and, the others that are in the 21 musicians that really dig deep and tell their stories. And it's quite interesting. I think people are going to be really surprised, just to read these stories of inspiration. And, it's already a #1 international bestseller on our pre-order. So we're pretty excited about launching.
It's pretty amazing. So there's been some really interesting stories. I feel like I'm very boring, really.
Well, you know what's happened is you know, you put it out there and the universe kind of makes up its mind to share some things that are pretty deep. You know, one of the stories is from a young man who was an orphan, grew up in an orphanage. And so how do you go from that to becoming so successful in creating a program? One of the stories is about a young lady who, you know, was born in one country, moved to America, didn't even speak the language. And at the age of 15, her name was changed and she became another human being. Another story about someone who found out at the age of 12 they were adopted and the torment that they went through, just thinking, I don't belong here, and just pouring their heart out into their music and saying, this is what saved me. And, you know, the stories go on. And I was so moved as I was reading them. I can't wait to share them with the world. I'm sure you're going to get a little box of Kleenex out.
So when's it out, Glory?
Yes, so April the 20th, you can pre-order right now. The pre-order is on right now, and it goes live on April the 28th. So you can get it as an ebook on your Kindle. You can also get it as a physical book. So both are going physically on sale on April the 28th, and you don't want to miss it because it's an incredible book. The Power of Why 21 Musicians Created a Program, and it's inspiring because you can too. So I hope it lights you up and gets you excited.
Can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Glory.
Absolutely. Don't forget to read Paul and Gillian's story because they're pretty cool.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Paul. Well, we'll also want to give a shout out to Luann from Georgia, and Erica from Miami, and Angela from Melbourne, who are also joining us today live. So it's fantastic. Thank you, guys. Well, as piano teachers, we all know that we should do technique, but a lot of the time we feel we don't really know how or when to start. And sometimes we don't even begin to even think about starting until they're in grade 4 or grade 5, or if there's a problem and that kind of thing. So, Rae, what advice do you have for us on that?
Well, I think one of the problems that we have with the history of the piano is that it grew out of the harpsichord, and the harpsichord technique was very controlled and very small. And so people got used to the idea that it was all about the fingers. And many of the tutor books that we've had for decades and decades simply start with their thumbs on middle C like this. Now, if we start with our thumbs on middle C, we straight away put our hand and arm into a really twisted position, which is not healthy. I mean, if you hold your hand up like this all day, you're going to get very sore and very uncomfortable. So that whole idea of starting with a legato hand position with the fingers tightly curled, I believe is not really suitable for the piano. You know, our fingers work much better if they work in a free way like this than if they are tightly curled up. And so I believe at the very beginning of learning, we should try and keep the freedom that kids are born with and that they come into our studio with. I would feel happier if actually what we did at the beginning was just to improvise on single notes with a free arm fall like this sort of thing. So the first thing I would teach is that free fall. I find even with the university students that some of them actually don't know how to do that because they've only thought about their fingers and they're not aware that the rest of the body is a really important part in our technique. So in Fit for Piano, we start talking about gravity and about how the arm can fall freely on the lap like that. And if it falls freely on the lap, then it can fall on the piano. And that's just like a parachute landing. It's a free fall of the arm. And I believe that's where we need to start, actually, from the very first lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. And I used to use a dozen a day with my students, but I found that they didn't necessarily join the dots between the exercises, those exercises, and applying them to their playing. I'm not convinced it really helped them very much, other than perhaps some independence of fingers. How are your exercises different?
Well, I mean, look, I use dozen a day as well. And I think there's nothing wrong with all of those exercises. I mean, the Churneys and the Hannons and all of those, a lot of people like to use them. We do need to have some finger work that we talk about independence of fingers, but one of the problems when we talk about independence of fingers, we expect them to move by themselves. Well, if you put your hand like this and try and lift your fourth finger, it doesn't come up very far. And in my day, we were told, oh, your fourth finger's weak. But actually, if you turn it over like this, it works just as well as the other fingers. And it's not meant to work independently because these two fingers are on the same tendon. And so they don't work well by themselves. Let the rest of the fingers come as well. And so I think there's nothing wrong with these technique books such as Dozen a Day. It depends how you do them. Understanding actually what goes into all of that is I think, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're going to look at teaching techniques in context of a piece, because I think if the best way to learn something, it really is to get the help when you need it, and to be looking at something in context is often a great way.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important to establish at the beginning is the support of our joints. People will talk about, oh, we need to have strong fingers, but actually, there are muscles in this part of the finger, but there are no muscles on the end of the fingers. So what we're really training is stability and freedom. And so that's the most important part that we have in Fit for Piano, that the fingers need to be free. They need to be free to operate. And these joints need to be supported. So in our book, we have a number of exercises which help that support of the joint. And I know Melody has one of them. I think you might like. This is the monkey pulling himself up into the tree, because all of these joints need to be worked so that they will support the finger. Now, many of the young kids will have collapsing joints at the end, but these joints are really quite easy to train if we know what sort of exercises to use. And I know Melody has some great exercises she uses to help that support of the finger.
Yeah, absolutely. And this book is really we've actually featured this book last year on the show in episode 9. So went into quite good detail about it, but it's a fabulous book because it's sort of like a toolkit of you can dip in and dip out with relevant things that you need. Melody, what is your experience of using Fit for Piano with young beginners?
Well, I think the beauty of Fit for Piano is it's so concise and versatile at the same time. So we've had professional pianists saying that it's improved their technique, but it also works marvelously with beginners and kids. And I teach quite a lot of beginners. Like my youngest student at the moment is 4, and we've just held a piano party for her over the weekend where she played all of the pieces in Suzuki Book 1, and she had such freedom and beautiful tone. And I've been using a lot of these exercises with her. So I think it works really well with young kids as well.
Yeah.
So, today is actually our pleasure to take some of the fantastically put together pieces on our practice buddy and just show how we can teach and build beginner technique with the help of practice buddy as well, especially taking advantage of using the backing tracks to make the practice of these techniques more enjoyable.
Ah, yes, exactly. And that's exactly right. So I know there's a number of studio members here today with us live, and as Melody just said, we are going to be using the backing tracks in the studio membership to demonstrate with today. So let's get started with a piece from the Discovering Beginners album. So Rae, what can you tell us about this piece?
We're talking about my pet dog from the beginning thing. Now, I would simply use this as an arm drop exercise. Once I got the student able to drop onto their lap like that so that they could fall onto the piano with a good sound and a free arm, we could use this in this My Pet Dog by simply falling like that. Now, I I'm actually supporting that end joint of my finger with my thumb. And I think that's a really good way to start if you've got somebody with those really wobbly joints that collapse all the time, just to help them to understand, yes, I can do that. And then the right hand. So I would use that piece as a falling exercise, and then you've got your lovely backing tracks, which will make that whole thing a pleasurable experience to practice.
Yeah. And falling was one of that initial skill that you just talked about when you started playing a little bit of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's actually the most important thing to start with. I mean, if you think about other instruments like violinists or flute players, they don't start by reading all the notes like we tend to on the piano. They start by learning to make a sound. Yes. And because we've got all these buttons that we can push down, it's very easy to start teaching without actually thinking about what is the tone we're making. If we make a good tone on one note, we can make a good tone on two notes, on 5, and on 100, you know?
Yeah. And I really love the supporting of that joint, because so many, particularly little ones, because we, have always taught kids from about 4. So those little ones don't often have that the strength within those joints yet.
They're very wobbly to start with, but really quite easy to train with some of the exercises. And I know Melody does something in one of your pieces where she rolls forward. Melody, you want to?
Yeah, that's right. So,
just before we go into that, Luann asked, are you placing your thumb behind the third finger, finger 3? If so, is it hard to get the student to untuck later?
Not at all, because, we'll only do that just for this one time. And we're only using it as one of the things. You could also do the same exercise using your thumb and dropping on it like that. We can use all of the other fingers. It's just really to give the student the experience of what it feels like when that joint is supported. Otherwise, it can do anything. And these conditions are so much easier to train when we've got a young student than when somebody like Melody came to the university. Her joints were all wobbly, and she was playing hugely advanced repertoire, and the joints were wobbling all over the place. So it actually didn't take very long, did it, Melody, to fix that?
No, not at all. I think it took me maybe about a week for my pinky to be able to stand and support its own weight. So I think these exercises are just invaluable. In fact, I feel like every single child that comes through the studio have wobbly joints. So it's something that we need to reinforce all the time. And I actually find with kids, every time they grow a little bit, when their hands get a little bit bigger, everything goes back to this wobbly stage again. So it's something that we have to monitor quite constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually really quite almost miraculous, Melody, that you must have loved piano playing so much that you were at that really advanced level decided that I've got to fix this and put all of this work in.
Oh, look, I think piano was my life. It has been my identity since I started playing when I was 3. So it was something that I just couldn't live without. So I was really grateful that Rae decided to take me on as a student and fix me back up.
So we've also got a comment here from Erica saying, I tell little ones to think of a kitty cat with claws and how they can't make their claws not curved. They are always that way. Is that a good idea to do that?
Yes, I guess. I just like the idea of we have to become aware of these joints. So Melody's got something where she pulls the...
Is it the monkey and the bananas?
Monkey and the bananas. Just tell us about that, Melody.
This is from this page here called Monkey Bar Pull-Ups. And I think when I'm teaching little kids, it's all about communicating and in the language that they can understand. So I do a lot of games and tell a lot of stories. So for a little kid, I might say that, here we've got a little monkey, and he's going to go and climb up the tree and collect 3 bananas. So we're going to go up 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana. But if the monkey's not strong enough, then if the joint curves out around this way, oops, we've lost the banana. So we're going to make sure that we got 1, 2, and 3 bananas and do it for a different finger and then a different finger. So usually I will ask the student to practice to do these pull-ups maybe 6 to 8 times on every single finger. And then do it whenever they go past the piano in their house. So lots and lots of repetition. And then it's about actually installing that idea in a piece as well. So we actually found a really lovely piece to practice the sort of stabilization of the joints, which is called Skater's Dream.
Let's look at that clip now. Lovely. We've got a number of great videos which we're going to keep on showing you later throughout the show. And one of the things that I noticed with when I was reviewing these for today's show is that your hands just look beautiful. They just look poetic. And you know how you see some children play and it's just think, oh no, I don't like those hands. But they're just, they're just.
Oh, thank you. People have good technique. It just it feels nice, it feels easy, and it's going to sound good, and a bonus point, it looks good as well.
Yeah. So and it just sort of conveys the actual feeling of the piece as well, I think.
Thank you.
One of the things might be worth talking about is the fact that we don't need to keep our fingers in a set hand position. And you might have noticed that when Melody was playing, she was actually moving with every single note. So there was nothing set like this, which is really restrictive. Instead of that, it was all free. It was all part of the musical phrasing, which I think is really important.
Yes, and sometimes we often, there's those ladybugs and stuff like that and the kids sort of to do that. And of course it's to encourage this kind of space in here, but sometimes that gets the kids to claw this kind of position, and then that you get this sort of whole freezing thing happening, don't you?
Absolutely. You don't want that tension. You want it to actually avoid it like the plague, really, because it just gets in the way of the musical feeling, and we want the freedom to be able to express ourselves and to enjoy music.
Yeah. And how do we apply this perhaps to another piece like maybe the Bach's Minuet in G?
It's really the same thing. I mean, if we've done those joint support exercises outside the piece, I think most of these techniques in Fit for Piano, we take them outside the piece and then we can put them back in. So if we look at Bach's Minuet, again, the hand will just move around. It won't be in one set hand position. I mean, if I just play like that, it immediately sounds restricted. But the minute I'm free, then we get the feeling that this is music, this is phrasing, it has meaning. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what about staccato?
Well, staccato, I like to think about in the same way as what we did when we fell on the note, when we actually used gravity. And so in my book, I have the trampoline bounce. And I think most kids understand what a trampoline bounce is. So if we bounce freely on the lap like that, then we can take that free fall into the piano. The note should have its quality. So staccato is not just one playing short like this. It's down and bounce. The minute we go down and bounce, we'll have something that has a bit of resonance. So it's not just a pick, a note that just sort of picks itself up, or the keys are hot and we get some kind of little sort of tic-tac type note. I want the staccato to have some sort of round sound, so it has a quality, that sort of thing like that. And I know in the book we just use a sixth like this, and we go up and down just with that freedom of movement, just like you would bounce on a trampoline.
And we've got a clip of Melody demonstrating that with one of the pieces, and it's a very cute little game that she plays, and I want one of them. I want one of those things. Let's show that video now. It's quite cute. Paul made for anybody who knows, Benny Hill. It's like Benny Hill. That might go right over the top. Melody doesn't know. But some people will know what we mean by that. So unpack that for us, Melody.
Yeah, so I think when I'm teaching trampoline bounces to little kids, first is actually getting them to be comfortable with bouncing. And it's actually easier to do that away from the keys, so not thinking about which notes that we're doing. So I've got this little very cute sort of chubby seal toy that we just put on our lap, and I just get them to bounce freely on this toy. And so once they can do that freely on their lap, then maybe we'll take just a fifth if it's a small hand, and maybe we'll do just once on the lap and then once on the piano, and then we can actually take it into a piece like Keystone Cop.
Mm-hmm. And you did it. So initially you did that like a fragment type thing where you just got them to bounce only on the potatoes.
Yeah, that's where I think the backing track comes really handy, because if you play the backing track along with this bouncing on the lap sort of movement, they're hearing the music, they're getting the pulse sort of into their head, and they're having fun, so that's really cool. Yeah.
And then you kind of went bounce, bounce, play, which kind of turns it up, doesn't it? Gets them concentrating.
Keep them on their toes. So whenever things get a little bit comfortable, I always like to take it up one level. But of course, it depends on the student. I may not do that straight away. I may just get them to go home and practice bouncing on their lap for at least 3 or 4 days, and then take it to the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vanessa Munns is with us from Western Australia, and she said she incorporated the trampoline bounce last year after watching the episode 9 last year, and also she watched your session, Melody, when you came on. Massive change for students in their ability to change their attack for the staccato.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah, that is terrific.
Right.
And so what happens, so if we've got time in a piece where we can just bounce like that, what happens in faster pieces though, when you really got to, where the staccato is actually very fast?
Sure. Well, what you do, most of the exercises in Fit for Piano are gross exercises, because we feel that a child will learn the most easily by using a big movement. Then what we need to do is to reduce that movement. So if we get something like the Bergmüller return, which has a number of staccatos in a row, so what we do then is we take the bounce over a gesture. So it's like down and up, down and up, down and up, down, up, down. And that way you're reducing the number of vertical downward movements by just kind of allowing, and in fact, that's another thing you could do on the lap, down and up, down and up, down and up, so that you're getting the feeling of the bigger gesture, but it's over 3 notes instead of every single note. And that, I think, applies all the way through the repertoire. We can take the basic movement and we can fine tune it and reduce it and then add it over a gesture.
And in something like that, when you've got a 6/8 type of a rhythm, by thinking of it that way, you actually then also create the rhythmic pulse. And
that's right. That's right. I mean, if we went faster, we could actually do it over 6. You could actually take more notes into the gesture, but that's at a more advanced level still.
Yeah, terrific. And we have this question in from Annette Lee from Singapore. How do you teach a student who has right and left hand coordination problems?
That's a really good question. I see a lot of this kind of issue in beginner and intermediate students. And what I tell my students is that there's a secret practice recipe they have to follow. And it's the 3 S's, right? So the first thing, are you practicing in small sections? And by small section, most kids will say, yeah, practice a whole page, 1 page at a time. It's like, no, that's way too many notes that you're practicing. If they're really having trouble, then let's reduce that to, how about just 3 bars? How about just 2 bars or 1 bar? And the second S that I ask them is, have you done your separate hands? And most of them would have maybe done just their right hand practice, but nothing on the left hand. So that might be another issue that's contributing to the coordination. And the third thing is slow practice. And I find most kids don't actually know what slow practice means. They sort of do like a fraction slower, but they have to really deliberately slow down. And I often find when students are having trouble with a certain part of the piece, it's one or more than one of these 3 S's that's missing in their practice. So are they doing small section enough, or are they doing separate hands? Is it slow enough when they practice? And usually that sorts things out.
If you have a student with profound learning difficulties, then I think you need to even break the thing down smaller. So it may be that you just leave them playing a right hand melody for a while, maybe just a few bars, and then add 1 note in the left hand and then add 2. It's always a challenge to actually break the thing down into even smaller components so that it becomes manageable.
Yeah,
if it's small enough and it's repeated enough, then you can achieve quite a lot.
Yeah, and you've got backing tracks. You can do that really nicely without them feeling as though it's a bit ho-hum, because it sounds good, even though they're doing that one thing, and they're learning a lot as well, just even if they're just not able to progress as quickly on one platform with the hands together thing, they're still learning lots of other things like rhythm and timing and all that kind of thing. We have another question from Diane Ellerton, who asked, when playing music that involves hands crossed over, which hand should play over the top of the other hand? Rae, have you got it?
Okay, well, I think it depends where you're coming from. If this hand, for example, is playing something like this, and you have to cross over like that, then it's obvious that the left hand will cross over. If we've got the left hand playing and you want to take the other hand, it's whichever hand is free. It doesn't matter whether it's the right hand or left hand. Mostly they go over the top. Very occasionally you may want to cross underneath, but that's probably only if you're at an advanced level and you're playing very far into the black notes. Then you might want to come underneath. But it's probably worth talking about the fact that when you cross over, it's really important that you're free in your posture on your sitting bones. The sitting bones are the little bumps that we sit on. And to play the piano, we need to be sitting right in the middle of them. If we sit behind them, we can't move from side to side. And if we sit in front of them, we also can't. We'll get locked. And so if we sit right in the middle of them, in the book, we have an exercise which is called the clock. And it's really where you move your pelvis around in the shape of a clock. And that actually helps the student to be aware of their pelvis and how they're sitting on the seat. And so when we're crossing hands, it's really important to take your body across to where you're crossing. For example, if I'm playing here and I try and cross over like this, especially if I use my thumb, my hand's going to be so twisted and uncomfortable. But if I use the long fingers and if I take my body, then my hand isn't so, my hand and arm are more straight, which is going to be much more much nicer and kinder to the body. So it's all about being able to move from side to side, using the long fingers as a preference to cross over with, and using the hand that actually is free to cross over in the most natural way.
Then these sit bones and having the children discover the sit bones, that can be actually kind of life-changing in terms of their playing.
It really is. I mean, especially, you get these teenage slouches, where the teenage boys tend to sit right like that and slouch. And all they've got is a kind of percussive, thing that just goes like that, and it's a horrible sound. And so, the minute you kind of make the student aware of how their posture is and how their body works, right from the seat, or actually right from the feet, but from the seat in any case, and the fact they can move on their sitting bones, it makes the world of difference to their sound.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did an episode 14 with Jane Shellshear with the body mapping, and she actually takes you through a number of different ways if you to help your students discover their sitting bones and sit onto that. So that's good. Paula actually was there doing the video because we did an in-person video, and he thought he had these kids doing I think grade 5 or something exam coming up, and he went back that afternoon and applied all that stuff, and he said miraculously by the end of the lesson they all sounded so much better. A simple little change,
It's fascinating, actually. Some years ago, I had a Feldenkrais practitioner. That exercise, the clock, came from a Feldenkrais background, and she did that kind of exercise with my class. And at the end of the lesson, everybody's sound had improved. It was just like, as you say, it was miraculous.
Exactly. Well, let's move on to 2-note slurs and 3-note slurs. Now, what do we have?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think 2-note slurs are probably one of the most important things in the whole of piano technique. We've talked about landing like a parachute, but we also need to leave like a hot air balloon. Now, the purpose of that is that you land like a parachute and you leave with no tension. So that the purpose of doing only 2 notes is, one, you have a free fall, and the way you leave the piano is completely free. I think Liszt talked about it as a dead hand, and that's a nice image. Or I've often talked about water dripping out of my hand, just absolutely like that, so that it's not carrying any tension. Because if we leave the tension there and somebody's playing a 4-page piece, by the end of 4 pages they say, oh golly, I don't feel comfortable. But the problem isn't with the 4 pages, it's probably with the first few bars. And so this feeling of releasing from whatever we've done is a really important thing to establish, I believe, right in the very beginning.
And Melody, how do you do this with your young students?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest problems when teaching slurs is that people drop with their wrist a little bit too low onto the keys, a bit too soon. So I just say to them that, at the end, here's your little guy, he's gonna parachute, and here's your parachute. It has to actually look like a parachute, right? So the little guy is going to land, and then the parachute is going to follow him onto the ground. We also don't want to go too low because parachutes don't do that. So we sort of land like this, and then let's try another one. And actually, I tell my students that this is puppy ears. So when you leave the keyboard, it should feel really floppy, like like puppy ears. And that's a really nice, really nice imagery for them. Yeah, so I guess when you have a student who's maybe playing something like the gavotte in G major, and there are a whole lot of 2-note and 3-note slurs in here. And so what if they're really new to this concept, what I might actually get them to do is to just practice landing on the first note of the slurs. And I think we've got a little video to demonstrate.
Let's have a look at it and worked on it based on a piece called Gavotte in G. Great. Do we want to unpack that anymore?
I guess what I might do with students is actually to send them home and just practice the parachute landings on the first note of the slur for at least a week. And when they look really comfortable and really free doing that, then adding the second or the third note actually comes really, really easily after that. So it's about doing the groundwork first, make sure they've got it, it's internalized, and then adding a little bit more on top.
Yeah.
Once we have the 2-note going like this, then to take 3 notes, we simply take the weight across the 3 and float off the last one. If it were 4 notes, we would take 1 more. And if there were 5 notes, you would again take 1 more note. So it becomes a whole series of gestures as opposed to 5 individual or 4 individual notes. It's a musical phrase.
And it's a whole one physical action as well. We actually have another sort of along that line, but it's about the scales. Any tip for the 5th finger of each hand to remain in neutral position and not raise too high, especially when it comes to playing scales?
I'm not totally quite sure what you mean. You don't want that 5th finger to raise too high. I mean, generally the problem people have is that it collapses over like that. And in our book, we actually want to develop this bridge of the hand. We want that to be able to be supported. My finger's not a great model because I broke it, but this joint here does need to be supported. And so when we're doing a scale, I think if you're talking about what happens at the top of a scale, there'll be a tiny little curvilinear movement to get around that top like that, which will actually help the positioning of the 5th finger. So I think with anything to do with scales, you don't want one position. You want to be adjusting all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that's answered your question, Gabriel. Tender flower, tell us about that one.
Well, we don't always want such a vigorous slur. I mean, in the one we've just had, you know, we're wanting a sort of quite a vigorous color to the piece. In Tender Flower, it's much more gentle. So instead of being such a vigorous movement, we're having a more gentle movement. So it's again the same movement. So you're still using that down and up, but it's not such a big movement, and it's slightly slower. You know, when we had the gavotte, it was quite a fast lift off, but in Tender Flower, it's only a slow, gentle one. That sort of idea.
So, Tender Flower is a Bergmüller, one of the Bergmüller's Opus 100, by the way, just so everyone knows what we're talking about. Sorry about that. And let's look at rotation now. Rae, can you talk to us about the concept of rotation?
Okay, well, the concept of rotation, our arms will rotate from the shoulder. We have in our book a wee doggy here shaking himself to get dry. And that's the image that we like to use to think, how does the arm work? The arm can rotate in its shoulder socket like that. However, when we're talking about beginner technique, we're mostly going to be using the rotation that comes from the elbow, which is a forearm rotation. Now, if you think of a Polynesian dancer, they do this a lot in their dancing, but they don't do this. Now, generally when people have problems with their rotation, they're trying to help with the wrist. So, you know, if I even take the left hand of something at an advanced level, like the pathetique, where we have a tremolo, and people will say, oh, my arm's falling off. But it's generally because they're trying to help with the wrist. And in order to do good rotation, the wrist just becomes a passageway. So the arm is doing this, and the wrist isn't helping. It's just very neutral. There's, you know, quite often I will put my fingers around a wrist like that to stop people doing all of these extra movements. That's the most efficient. Yeah.
And so, Melody, how can this be taught with a student?
That's a really good question. I think actually fast rotation and slow rotation is very much the same, but with beginner students, when they're playing a piece that's a little bit slower, it's not quite as rapid as the dot shaking sort of movement. I find actually a cutout of a rainbow, this prop, works beautifully. So what I often get my students to do is actually just to trace that shape of a rainbow a few times, and this actually prevents them from doing all sorts of funny things in their wrists. Yeah, have we got a video?
I think we do have a video, so let's look at that now.
One.
Go a bit bigger. Just a bit bigger, and all the way up. Nice, Melanie. Let's try a bit faster. See if it works.
That was good. She got a nice hand, nice relaxed hand going on there, which is lovely.
One of the things that it would be good to mention there is that you only had a little hand. She didn't need to stretch that entire octave in order to rotate like that. I mean, I could rotate between notes that far apart if I use that movement. And so one of the things that people get into trouble with is that they stretch. And so they'll be going like this, and this is just like a rod, instead of which you just need to stretch to the hand's most comfortable position and then use the movement to get from note to note, just like a skipping rope or something. Yeah.
That's a really great point. Thank you. And you've also done this with Toccata, a grade 4 piece.
Yes. Well, this piece out of, I think it's your grade 4. As you can see, my hand is just rotating like that. And the left hand. So it's just really moving from side to side, not up and down. If the minute I started to go up and down, it would be difficult. And if I just tried to use my fingers over a set, that would be really hard. So the idea of using this sideways movement is going to make all of that so much easier. And actually that applies whether we're doing something like an Alberti bass, where we have something like this. You know, if we teach that by just simply taking the outside notes like that and rocking, and the inner side, and then putting that together, then I can have it at a very early level. I can have a really beautifully set up rotation and an Alberti bass, which when I'm going fast at a later level, it's already done. And that also applies, you know, with trills as well. You know, if we trill with our arm like this with a rotation, it's going to be very much easier than if we just use our fingers alone.
Yeah. And so when is a good time to start technique?
I think from the first lesson, absolutely. First lesson, we come and we learn, we make friends with the piano. We learn that our whole body moves, not just our fingers. That's my philosophy. So whatever comes up in the repertoire, whether it's something, really straightforward like My Pet Dog we started with, you get the movement going, put it in the piece, and then you have that technique becoming part of the building blocks of technique that are going to go right through the repertoire.
And we had a chat earlier about tutor books, and maybe we don't need to be restricted to what we do by just only what's in that tutor book, because that will just mean that we're in this, a fixed position.
Well, I think that the Fit for Piano is not meant to replace a tutor book. It's not meant to be something you work through from beginning to end. It's a toolbox. So whatever comes up in whatever tutor book you're using, whatever piece you're playing, you can find that basic element of technique. You'll find an exercise for it in Fit for Piano. You take it out from the piece or from the tutor book, you learn that skill, and then you put the skill back into whatever it is you're playing. Yeah. And so I think that's the beauty, that it actually applies at any level. In fact, one of the things we're going to do in our piano class next week at the university is what we've asked our students to do is to, in your pieces, identify which techniques you're using at different places in your piece and bring them along to class, just to make them aware. Otherwise, the techniques tend to overlap, and we the movements are not always as logical as they should be.
Yeah, exactly. We're finishing today with a really good trick with Rae actually playing a piece, and we've labelled all the techniques as they turn up in the piece. So stay around for that. So this isn't any old book, because there's just videos and Melody and Rae have really worked together to create a truly interactive book with the video demonstrations. So we actually did go into a lot of detail in episode 9. So please go back and look at that episode 9. Any other sort of final kind of summary you'd like to talk about that?
Just really that, in the book, we've got a print version and an electronic version. And in the print version, we have QR codes, so that you scan the QR codes on your phone and up pops the video. So we've got a video of the relevant exercises. This generally is a picture which portrays something to do with the exercise. There's often the exercise written out. And then there's another little video here where I pop up and show how these exercises apply to repertoire, whatever level you're playing at. So that's kind of how the book works. One of the things that I find about it, I find it saves an enormous amount of lesson time, because if I've got a skill that I want to teach the student, I send them home with the book and I say, look, this is your skill. I teach it to them once, and it is reinforced by them looking at the book during the week. So they're less likely to forget what it is I've talked about.
And looking at the video, they forget.
It's really, really helpful, I think.
Yeah, and I found with the students of mine that didn't have the book, they would come back the next week, haven't really got the technique, they'll learn the notes, but they haven't really learned the movements. So the ones that actually bought the book when it first came out, pretty much all of them came back having learned the correct movement. So we didn't have to spend more lesson time talking about the same thing the next week. So I just told all my students, look, if you want to save time, go get yourself a copy of the book.
Yeah. Vanessa says, how do we get the book? No, so originally it came out as an app, wasn't it? Like on iTunes or something.
Yeah, an ebook. Yes, it was
an ebook. And about now we have the print version, which I have my own copy of. So we're going to have a link in our show notes for this, but it's fit. Rae, would you like to tell everybody how you get that?
I think you'll be telling us on the show tunes, but show notes. But there will be a special discount code for this episode. We're giving you 10% off, which is, I think, great. And yeah, I hope people will really enjoy it.
Yes, well, I pay full price for mine, but you can. And the other thing that's fantastic. It's about $65 for the print version, and you can actually. I was thinking, wow, it'd be really great to have both the print version and the digital version, because sometimes if you're just working with it from an iPad, you could just flick, and particularly if you're working online over the internet with the student, you could actually just go click and you're straight there, where otherwise you've got to do QR codes, which can be great as well. It just kind of depends on how you kind of work and how you're working in that lesson. What do you prefer, Rae?
Well, I prefer the print version just simply because my iPad I'm often using for scores and various other things, and or else I don't have it. Whereas I can easily carry the print version with me, and that suits me. But I know Melody, she likes the electronic one, being of a younger generation.
So tell us, Melody, what do you like? Is that
I definitely I use the iPad a lot more in my teaching, and especially when we were doing a lot of Zoom lessons, it was just easy to share the screen and get the students to look at it on their Zoom as well. But yeah, on the website, we actually have a special bundle price for both of them together. So e-version and the printed version for 95 New Zealand dollars. And with a discount code today, you're actually going to get 10% off the whole thing, which is pretty good.
It is pretty good. So how much is the digital version normally?
The digital version is 55 New Zealand dollars. And the printed version is $69.95 New Zealand dollars.
Okay, and the discount code is Piano Teaching Success 21.
Right, one thing.
Great big thing, no spaces. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today. And that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank Rae de Lisle and Melody Deng for being with us today. And we're going to be back in 2 weeks' time with another great episode of Q&A. If you're watching us on YouTube, please click the like and subscribe buttons now to make sure you're notified when a next section of Q&A is released. And remember to send us your questions for the future. It's been so lovely to have a couple of questions today to ask our guests. I'd like to thank Paul Myatt, who has been producing today's show and is responsible for all the videos and behind the scenes tech. We have a treat for you today. We're going to go out to a piece many of you will know by composer George Bender, and it's called Sonatina in A minor, and Rae will be demonstrating various of the techniques throughout this piece. Paul's been hard at work on editing skills. I hope you enjoy it, and on behalf of all of us, stay well, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.